Have you ever been unable to see something that is right in front of you? Maybe someone asks you to go and get the mince pies, so you go to the next room, you have a look in the cupboards, you have a look in the drawers, you open the tins, but after a couple of minutes you shout out, "Where are the mince pies? I can't see them." Then that other person comes into the room, picks up the plate of mince pies off the side and says, "Look, they're right there in front of you." Well, that sort of thing has happened to me on more than one occasion. Sometimes we're unable to see something that is right in front of us. And the thing is, we can often think that of other people at Christmas. Many Christians can't help but notice how more and more the public celebrations around Christmas try and avoid any reference to its historical origins. But Jesus is the reason for the season, they think to themselves. Surely it's obvious if anyone thought about it. But maybe this evening you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. And for you, Christmas is a largely secular holiday. And the idea to you of people celebrating the birth of a baby born 2,000 years ago, well, it just kind of makes you cringe. There's nothing more to Christmas, really, than an excuse for a couple of days off work, some good food, and time with the family. Surely any intelligent person could see that. Well, for the next couple of minutes, would you allow me the opportunity to explain one aspect of the meaning of Christmas? And at the end, you can consider whether it helps you see things more clearly. Because the message of Christmas starts by acknowledging that we live in a world full of darkness. Each year we know that Christmas is approaching by the putting up of lights. When the lights go up, we know Christmas is coming. But this association between lights and Christmas, it isn't just something that's meant to make our Christmas tree look pretty. No, it actually reflects one of the most profoundest truths of our existence. We live in a world full of darkness. The prophet Isaiah recognized that when he said those words which David read to us earlier. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2. "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." We live in a world full of darkness. That wasn't just true for the nation of ancient Israel in the 8th century facing the threat of Assyrian invasion. No, it's also true for us today. As we look back on the year of 2020, for many of us, it may well be one of the hardest years of our lives. Not one person watching this broadcast this evening hasn't had their lives affected by coronavirus. For some of us, it's affected our family plans, our travel plans, our social plans. For others of us, the impact has cut a lot deeper. Because for some of us, this year has meant tiring night shifts in PPE. It's meant weeks on furlough and the risk of redundancy. It's meant the painful loss of loved ones and then the emptiness of a live-streamed funeral. Now, if there was ever a year in recent history when we have felt the darkness of our world, it has got to be this one. But when the Old Testament prophet Isaiah used that word darkness, he didn't just use it to describe human suffering. Because when the Bible uses that word darkness, it also refers to the fact that we can't cure ourselves from it. As the novel strain of coronavirus made its way across the world, a whole range of solutions were suggested to the problems that virus created. But as time has gone on, there has been one thing that we have all looked to more than anything else as the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's a vaccine. I've been amazed to hear of how quickly scientists have been able to develop a vaccine for this strain of coronavirus. And I'm praying that as it starts to be distributed in the UK and, God willing, in every other country in the world, it will save many lives. But we should be cautious about thinking that just because as a humanity we've been able to develop a vaccine for this strain of the virus, that means we can eliminate all the darkness in our world. The weekend before last, I went for a walk with a junior doctor who right now is working on a COVID ward. And she was telling me about how some of her colleagues are trying to keep up their spirits as they deal with this second wave. Do you know how they're doing it? They're doing it by quoting the words of Parry Cox, a character from the American medical drama Scrubs. This is what Parry Cox says to a junior doctor. You're in medicine. You've got to accept the fact that everything we do here, everything is a stool. We're just trying to keep the game going. That's it. But ultimately, it always ends up the same way. Now that quote is well known by many junior doctors. But it's a pretty dark way of looking at the world. Yet it's true, isn't it? Even if this vaccine, God willing, is able to get most of us through this coronavirus pandemic, well, it's not going to stop any of us from going to the grave. But that's not the message of Christmas. Christmas doesn't say to us, if we just pull ourselves together, we can save ourselves from the darkness. No, Christmas tells us, yes, things are indeed as bad as they seem, and we can't save ourselves. But nevertheless, there is still hope. Because whilst Christmas starts with an acknowledgement that we live in a world full of darkness, well, it finishes by recognizing that in Jesus, God's light has dawned on our dark world. Let me read those verses to you from Isaiah again. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Someone has helpfully pointed out that when Isaiah is talking about this light that's dawning on a dark world, he's using the image of a sun. A sun, it gives us life, doesn't it? Do you know how long we would last if the sun just stopped shining like that? Well, not long. Within a week, the surface temperature of the earth would have plummeted to minus 17 degrees Celsius. Within a couple of weeks, most vegetation and plants will have died. And within a month, you and I probably would be as hard as ice. The sun gives life to everything, and so too the Bible says about God. At every moment, God holds everything together, including this moment. But the sun doesn't just give us life, it also shows us the truth. If you went out driving tonight in the dark without any lights on, what would probably happen? If it was me, I most likely would crash. And that's because light shows us things as they truly are. And so too the Bible says about God. God is the source of all truth. If you just think about it on the most basic level, He's the one who has made our minds. He's the one that has given us the amazing capacity to think thoughts. And He is the one in His grace who has revealed Himself to us in His word, the Bible. But it's not just life and truth that the Son gives us. No, crucially, well, it's just so beautiful. I want you to stop and have a look around in the room that you're sat in. Have you got any lights up for Christmas? Why is that? Well, because lights, they're dazzling, they're beautiful, they give us joy. And so too the Bible says about God. God is the source of all joy. It was Augustine, the 4th century theologian from North Africa, who said that our hearts are restless until we find their rest in God. What Augustine meant by that is that even if we're enjoying something else, our enjoyment of that ultimately comes from God. After all, God is the one who has made it. And the thing that we enjoy about it, well, it's because it's got God's fingerprints all over it. The message of Christmas is of God's light shining into our world full of darkness. Because you see, when a young lady called Mary, who gave birth in a smelly cattle shed on the outskirts of a rural village called Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, the child she gave birth to wasn't like any other. No, as the prophet Isaiah had said 700 years before, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. As you watch this broadcast this evening, you might be someone who sees Christmas as really just an excuse for good food and time with family. But if that's you, is it possible that you could be missing something that's right in front of you? This year, we've all had to become very good at assessing risk. But this year, 2.5 billion people around the world will be celebrating Christmas not as a secular holiday, but as the moment that in Jesus, God's light shone into our darkened world. And I just wonder whether to go through life without looking further into that Christmas message, well, that's quite a risk to take. But you might be someone this evening who has looked into that Christmas message. Maybe you've asked Christian friends about it. Maybe you've been recently to a church and heard teaching from the Bible about it. You may have even read the accounts of Jesus in the New Testament yourself. Yet for all of that, you're still living under a weight of darkness. Well, if that's you, can I say this? When you enter a room and you're looking for something and the lights are dark, you've got to turn the light on before you find it. And it just might be that the one thing you need to do this evening is just turn the lights on. Because you see, when we trust in Jesus as the hope of our lives in the midst of a dark world, it's not just like seeing someone in front of us that we haven't been able to see before. No, it's like seeing the light by which we see everything